Greetings and welcome to PinballHelp. Mike here. Today work continues on this Stern NBA pinball machine that I've got, and I finally got some parts that I ordered. I did an initial survey from the previous video where I kind of looked over what I thought was wrong with the game, needed some parts, things were broken. Ordered the parts, they came in, so now that the parts are in, I've been systematically going from one end of the playfield to the other, fixing the things that I noticed that were wrong. So this game was on location probably for quite a long time. It looks like it was a fairly reliable game in that multiple things broke, but the game still operated on location, and maybe the operator didn't know or didn't care, and the game still made money even while certain things were broken, like slingshots or pop bumpers. So I got the game, I'm going over and I'm fixing everything, and I'm just, this is an interesting audit of what will happen on this particular game if it's just left running long enough. It was obviously filthy, but you can see from the underside of the playfield that it's pretty darn clean. This is not necessarily an abused game, it just wasn't kept clean a whole lot, but it was probably in a pretty clean environment. So I'm going to go over what I've done so far. I think I've taken care of just about all the problems on the underside of the playfield. I have a few concerns, but I'll go over one by one. So the first thing I did was we had one of the pop bumpers that was broken and was just not working. On this game there's 3 pop bumpers, 1, 2, 3. This one is the one that was broken, and the yoke on it was actually completely broken. Let me show you, because I have the parts. So the pop bumper was not operating, but the coil seemed to be working, and this is the problem. This is actually the metal. There's a yoke and there's a piston, and so there's a metal part and then there's a kind of a fibrous part that goes over like this over the piston, and you can see it actually literally broke off. Both the metal and the fibrous part broke. Probably what happened was one part broke and it continued to keep working until the other part broke. So whoever was operating this game just wasn't paying any attention to it, and it caused more damage. Usually I see the fibrous part break, not the metal part. In this case the metal part broke. This is a bit more expensive, so I only ordered one of them, but luckily only one of them. I wasn't even sure this was broken. I thought for sure it was just the fibrous part, but both parts were broken, so I replaced them. And I'll go over that. I probably should have done a video when I had the thing apart, but the problem is, I don't, the coils and everything are all soldered onto the game, so oftentimes you have to kind of lean over into the game to work on it. It's not always easy to do a really nice clinical, here's how you take apart a pop bumper video, which would be very useful, but oftentimes you're working in the middle of the game, so it's just an odd angle, you can't get the camera on it. But I'm going to try to tell you the process of fixing these things real quick. So let's look at this lower pop bumper here that's more obvious. Okay, so you see you've got the coil, you've got the yoke, and you can see the fibrous part and the metal parts on the other side, and then there's a piston in there. Let me get one of the pistons. I actually replaced the piston with a new piston just because I wanted to see how well it would perform. This is the original one. It was perfectly good. I probably should have used it, but I got some new ones that don't look as well made as this, but I'm just curious if they're going to last as long and work well, so I thought I would swap one of them out. So the way it works is the yoke slips, let me back up just a little bit. The yoke slips on either side of this, and there's a little U-shaped hook. So when you're working on this thing, to take it apart, you first have to undo 3 screws that hold it to the playfield. Then you can pull it off, but then you've also got to do the 2 nuts here, well, 3 nuts that hold the bracket down, and there's 2 nuts that connect to the actual pop bumper assembly that pulls down from the upper playfield. So there's 5 nuts you have to remove. Once you do that, you pull the whole assembly out. You have your coil, and then you have a little bracket. It's not visible, but it's right here on the underside. It's what this thing hits against when it's going up. There's a bracket there, and there's 2 screws. You remove that bracket, and then the whole assembly comes out. Now when you go to put it back together, the key is you put it back together in the bracket. You can't put it part way in here and then put the bracket in later. You have to put the whole assembly with the spring and the yokes in the bracket, and then you put it back in place, feed it in through the bolts, and screw it all back together. It probably would be easier to explain, but if you take it apart and you take a look at it, it's pretty self-explanatory. The only tricky part is when you go to put this back together, this whole assembly, you want to put the bracket inside of it. So there's a bracket, the yokes, a spring, and then you attach it all back together, and it works. And so there's the original piston minus the yoke. So there's one yoke that goes this way and there's one yoke that goes that way. The metal one on the underside and the fiber one on the top. And then these things just screw in, and then you drop it right back in, and we have a nice, this is actually the one over here that I replaced, and I put a new coil sleeve in there, and it should all be working nice. So that was the first thing I did. Then there's a vertical up kicker right below here, right below the pop bumpers right there. This thing had the spring completely broken off, so I took it apart and I put a new spring in there, and the coil sleeve is a very odd, very long coil sleeve, so I didn't have a replacement for that. But I cleaned it, took a paper towel, ran it through it, used some dry lube on it, and cleaned everything up, and it works nice. So now that there's a new spring in here, this lifts the ramp on the underside that diverts the ball up to the basketball goal. And while I had it off, I put the meter on the coils to make sure that they all registered fine. These coils, these 23800s, are all about 4 ohms, so that's their normal value. Everything seems to be working here. And let's see, as I moved up to work on a few other things that were broken, and as I was going, I started replacing all the LEDs, all of the lights there with LEDs. In fact, let me fire it up, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Now we've got LEDs on the underside of the playfield. Nice and poppy. You'll see there's a combination of cool and warm LEDs. I replaced the incandescents. They all weren't burning very brightly, so I have reason to believe maybe there's a connector issue somewhere in the head that was slightly burned out. But once I put LEDs in there, they're all going nice. The warm ones are underneath yellow and red and orange bezels, and the white ones are underneath white and blue and green bezels. So that's why there's a difference there in cool and warm white. And I don't think you'll even notice a difference. Now you see they're flashing, they're ghosting a little bit. That's actually the code making the lights slightly dim. So there will be a slightly different effect when you put LEDs in some of these games. It'll kind of ghost a little bit like that. That doesn't bother me. Some people might really be annoyed, but you see when they're all on solid, you can't tell the difference. It's only when they're kind of slightly dimmed by pulsing that there will be problems. I don't have a problem with that. I'd rather that minor little visual effect and also have the game run cooler and use a significantly less electricity, so I'm totally cool with that. So let's see, what else did I do up here? I replaced one of the linkages on the slingshot up here. The old linkage was basically broken. Look at that, you can see it was completely broken off, so I pulled this out and I replaced that linkage with a brand new one. And now the slingshot on the other side, the coil, you can see it's not completely in, it's right here. I haven't installed it yet, but I did. This is a brand new coil that I put on here. The coil that was in it was burned up. It had shorted, and I don't know what caused it, whether it was, say, sometimes on pop bumpers the rubber will get stuck on the wrong side of the flapper, and it'll actually cause the contacts to stick together and maybe keep this thing on. It's not necessarily intelligent. That may have been what happened. That's what I'm hope happened, was it heated it up and blew it. Now here's my concern. Whenever there's a coil that has been shorted on a game, you wonder whether the driver transistor might also be blown. I don't know for sure if there is a corresponding driver transistor for this, because sometimes these pop bumpers operate on an autonomous circuit. They're dumb. They've got these two switches on either side, so whenever the switches are hit, they fire, and the game really doesn't control them. I'm hoping that's the case here, which means that since this coil shorted out, it didn't take anything else on the controlling driver board with it. Usually when a coil goes, it's a controlled coil, it'll blow the driver transistor and the pre-driver transistor. Then you have to get on the motherboards, start pulling things apart, replacing transistors and stuff. I don't know. I'm going to start a game and I'm going to see if this locks on. If I start a game and it locks on, okay, I got problems on the driver board I'm going to have to deal with. If I start a game and it doesn't lock on, I'm good to go. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. I've pretty much taken care of most of the underside of the playfield. It's all looking good. And as usual, I'm just kind of looking around. I saw a few things. There was a wire up here by the slingshot that was broken, and I surmise this wire, it's one of these, I forget which one, but I repaired it. It was literally part of the controlled light circuit that was cut in two, and I think it was from the pop bumper. It got close to the pop bumper assembly and it got janked by it. You got to sometimes watch some of these wires, because they can get in the way of some of the mechanical devices, and then they'll just get cut in half by them if they're in the wrong place while the thing fires. Another thing I noticed is, Stern used this interesting kind of removable section where you can take the lights out. You can pinch and actually remove the lights, which is kind of neat for fixing lights. You see, you can actually literally move it. But if you unplug a bunch of them, you don't always know exactly where they're supposed to go. So you could have the wrong light in the wrong position, because some of these have pretty long leads on them. And so you got to be careful when you're replacing these lights. Do them a little batch at a time so you don't actually get them mixed up. And since they do have long wires, like this wire here could wander over near where this slingshot is, and if the slingshot mechanism hits it, it'll cut that wire in half, and of course that's not a good thing. So you always want to pay attention to the wiring, see if anything is in the way of anything else. The most common kind of wiring problems you end up having is loose wires along the edge that end up getting pinched from opening and closing the thing. If you ever have weird wiring problems, check the wiring harness and see if you see a wire that's out that might have gotten rubbed by something. This all looks in pretty good condition. Everything seems to be in order. So I'm getting close to firing this thing up and seeing how well it works. And then I'm going to be working on the top side of the game, mainly cleaning. I think there's one opto that's not working properly that I'm going to have to fiddle with. I couldn't get a replacement opto, so I'm going to have to rebuild it or fix it. So that's where we're at. So far, so good. Hopefully we'll see this Stern NBA. I'll be able to demo it for you soon enough. So until next time, be sure to subscribe, YouTube/PinballHelp, and thanks for watching.